They told you that your degree was the key to freedom. But for millions of Americans, it became a life sentence. You can go bankrupt gambling millions, but you can't escape your student loans. This system wasn't an accident. It was engineered to trap you. While you drown in interest, they are making a fortune. It follows you to the grave. It takes your wages. It takes your life. It is time to expose the scam. Watch this before you pay another cent.
What if I told you there's a debt that follows you to the grave, survives bankruptcy, and was deliberately engineered to be unpayable? Right now, over 43 million Americans are trapped in what might be the most insidious financial scheme ever legitimized by law, the student loan system. We're not talking about a few $1,000s. The average borrower carries around $37,000 in student debt, but for many, especially those who pursued graduate degrees, that number easily climbs past 6 figures. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. Unlike virtually every other form of debt in America, this one is designed to be inescapable. Here's something that might shock you. If you rack up $50,000 in credit card debt buying things you don't need, make terrible financial decisions, even gamble away your savings at a casino, you can discharge most of that debt in bankruptcy and get a fresh start. The system actually has an escape hatch built in for almost every kind of financial mistake or misfortune you can imagine. Mortgage debt? There's foreclosure and bankruptcy protection. Medical bills crushing you? Bankruptcy can wipe them clean. Business venture failed spectacularly? Chapter 7 or 11 can help you rebuild. But that student loan you took out at 18 years old, believing the promise that education was the path to the American dream, that debt is special. That debt is forever. It survives bankruptcy. It follows you through job loss, through illness, through every catastrophe life throws at you. They can garnish your wages, seize your tax refunds, even take a cut of your Social Security when you're 70 years old and thought you'd finally escaped. The question burning in your mind right now should be, how did this happen? How did we create a system where the debt you incur trying to better yourself becomes a financial life sentence, while debt from reckless spending gets a pass? Who decided that pursuing education, something we're told from childhood is the key to success, should come with terms that would make a loan shark blush? And more importantly, who's profiting from this arrangement? Because make no mistake, someone is making an absolute fortune off this system, and it's not the students drowning in payments or the professors teaching the classes. This isn't incompetence. This isn't an unintended consequence of well-meaning policy. What you're looking at is engineering, cold, calculated, and ruthlessly effective. The student debt crisis isn't a bug in the American economic system. It's a feature, carefully constructed over decades through lobbying, legislation, and the kind of political maneuvering that happens in shadows, while the rest of us are told to just work harder and make better choices. The answer isn't that you failed. It's that the game was rigged before you ever sat down to play. What you're about to see is how modern indentured servitude was legalized, marketed as opportunity, and sold to an entire generation. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Before we dive deeper into how this trap was set, I need to pause for just a moment, because this is exactly the kind of conversation that doesn't happen enough in mainstream media, and there's a reason for that. The forces we're about to expose don't want you connecting these dots. They thrive on isolation, on making you feel like your struggle is personal failure rather than systemic design. That's why your voice here matters more than you might realize. If this is resonating with you right now, if you're feeling that knot in your stomach because you recognize your own story in what we're discussing, drop a comment below and tell me where you are in this journey. Are you drowning in student debt right now? Did you avoid college altogether because you saw this trap coming? Maybe you're one of the lucky ones who escaped, or maybe you're a parent watching your kids face these same impossible choices. Whatever your experience, share it, because every comment adds another piece of evidence that this isn't about individual mistakes. It's about systemic corruption, and here it actually matters. Hit that like button. Not because I need an ego boost, but because that simple click is how we beat the algorithm that would rather keep you watching cat videos than understanding how financial power actually works in this country. Every like you give tells the platform that people want this information, that there's an audience for truth even when it's uncomfortable. Your participation here is literally what allows this channel to reach more people who need to hear this message, who are still operating under the illusion that the system is fundamentally fair and they just need to try harder. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because what we're building here isn't just a collection of videos, it's a community of people who refuse to accept the official narratives about money, power, and who really runs things. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the story we're telling doesn't end with student loans. This is one chapter in a much larger book about how wealth extraction has been systematized, legitimized, and sold to us as normal. The rabbit hole goes deep, and if you're ready to keep following it, I want you there for the journey. Now, let's get back to the question that should be burning in your mind. How exactly did student debt become the only unforgivable sin in American finance? To understand that, we need to go back to a specific moment in time when the lobbying machine went into overdrive and reshaped the law itself. The transformation didn't happen overnight. This wasn't a single dramatic moment where Congress gathered in a smoke-filled room and decided to enslave a generation. No, this was slow, methodical, surgical, the kind of long game that only people with serious money and patience can play. To understand how we got here, you need to go back to the 1970s, when student loans were actually treated like any other consumer debt. Back then, if you hit financial rock bottom, you could discharge student loans in bankruptcy just like car loans or credit card bills. The system had balance. It acknowledged that sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, that economic catastrophe can strike anyone, and that people deserve a chance to rebuild. But that balance was about to be deliberately destroyed, piece by piece, through a series of legislative maneuvers that most Americans never saw coming. The first crack appeared in 1976, when Congress passed legislation saying you had to wait 5 years after your loans entered repayment before you could discharge them in bankruptcy. On the surface, it seemed reasonable. Prevent people from graduating on Friday and filing bankruptcy on Monday. But this was just the opening move, the first test to see if anyone would push back. They didn't. So the machine kept grinding. By 1990, that 5-year waiting period was extended to 7 years, and the exceptions were narrowing. The truth is, most people weren't paying attention to these technical changes in bankruptcy law. Student debt wasn't the massive crisis it is today, so these legislative shifts happened quietly, without protest, without headlines. That's exactly how systemic corruption works. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps forward in the shadows while everyone's looking elsewhere. Now here's where the story gets really ugly, where the players reveal themselves in full. Enter Sallie Mae, originally created as a government-sponsored enterprise to help students access education funding. Sounds noble, right? But by the 90s, Sallie Mae had privatized and transformed into something else entirely. A profit-seeking behemoth with one goal: extract maximum wealth from student borrowers and protect that revenue stream at all costs. And they weren't working alone. Major banks saw the writing on the wall. Student lending was becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry with virtually zero risk because the government guaranteed these loans. Think about that business model for a second. You get to lend money to young people with no credit history, no collateral, no ability to escape the debt. And if they default, the government covers your losses. It's the most beautiful scam ever devised. Privatized profits, socialized risks, and a captive customer base that grows every single year. These financial institutions understood something crucial. To protect this golden goose, they needed to make sure students could never escape. So they deployed an army of lobbyists to Washington, armed with campaign contributions, favorable media coverage, and the kind of access to power that ordinary citizens can only dream about. The revolving door between Wall Street and government was spinning at maximum speed. Executives from lending companies would take positions in the Department of Education, craft policy favorable to lenders, then return to the private sector with even bigger salaries. Politicians received massive donations and suddenly discovered a passionate concern for bankruptcy reform. The narrative they sold was brilliant in its cynicism. They claimed that students were abusing the bankruptcy system, that hordes of graduates were strategically defaulting to escape their obligations. Never mind that the data didn't support this claim. Never mind that student loan discharge in bankruptcy was actually quite rare. The story was what mattered, and they had the money to make that story stick. Then came 2005, the year the trap snapped shut completely. The Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act, a piece of legislation with an Orwellian name if there ever was one, because it did the exact opposite of consumer protection. This law made it nearly impossible to discharge student loans in bankruptcy unless you could prove undue hardship, a legal standard so vague and so difficult to meet that it might as well say never. Judges have interpreted this to mean you'd essentially need to be permanently disabled, with no hope of ever earning income again. And even then, you'd have to fight through an expensive legal process that most broke, desperate people simply cannot afford. Let that sink in for a moment. You could gamble away $50,000 in Atlantic City, file bankruptcy, and walk away clean. You could rack up credit card debt buying luxury goods you never needed, file bankruptcy, and start fresh. But if you borrowed money to become a teacher, a nurse, a social worker, if you invested in yourself and your future contribution to society, that debt follows you forever. The decision was deliberate, the impact was predictable, and the people who crafted this system knew exactly what they were creating. What we're looking at here isn't policy failure. This is policy success. If your goal is to create a permanent underclass of debtors, to ensure a steady flow of wealth from the middle class to financial institutions, to trap an entire generation in decisions they made at 18 years old, when they were told this was the only path to success, the journey from well-intentioned government program to predatory wealth extraction machine is complete. And it happened with barely a whisper of resistance, because the revelations about how money and power really work in this country are still hidden from most people. You're getting a glimpse behind the curtain right now, seeing the machinery that usually operates out of sight. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you're feeling that mix of anger and clarity right now, drop a comment and just write, "I see it now." Let me know this is landing, that you're connecting these dots, because we're about to go even deeper into how this machine actually operates on a day-to-day basis. Now I want to go even deeper into how this machine actually operates on a mechanical level, because understanding the inner workings of this system is what separates awareness from true comprehension. Once you see how the money flows, how the mathematics are rigged, and who's collecting the checks, the whole picture snaps into focus with terrifying clarity. This isn't just a broken system that needs fixing. It's a perfectly functioning wealth extraction mechanism working exactly as designed. Let's start with the interest, because this is where the real magic happens. When you take out a student loan, you're not just agreeing to pay back what you borrowed. You're entering into a compound interest arrangement that can turn a manageable debt into a life sentence. Here's how it works in practice. Imagine you borrowed $40,000 for your degree. You start making payments, maybe $200 or $300 a month, and you're doing everything right, never missing a payment. But here's what's happening behind the scenes. Most of your monthly payment is going straight to interest, barely touching the principal. The balance might actually grow even as you're paying, especially if you had to use income-driven repayment plans or went through periods of deferment or forbearance. Those pauses in payment that seemed like relief. The interest kept accumulating, capitalizing, getting added to your principal balance. So now you're paying interest on interest on interest. People who borrowed $40,000 can easily end up paying back $80,000, $90,000, even $100,000 over the life of the loan. And some never pay it off at all because the growth outpaces their payments. The hidden truth here is that this isn't a bug in the system. It's the entire business model. Lenders don't want you to pay off your debt quickly. They want you on a payment plan for 20, 25, 30 years, because that's where the real profit lives. Every month you stay in debt is another month they're extracting wealth from your paycheck. And the beauty of it, from their perspective, is that you can't escape. Unlike a mortgage where you can sell the house, unlike a car loan where you can sell the vehicle, your education can't be repossessed. The debt is attached to you personally, permanently, inescapably. It's pure profit with zero risk. Now let's follow the money and see where it actually goes, because this is where the impact of this system becomes undeniable. When you make your student loan payment each month, That money flows into a complex network of servicers, guarantors, and investors. The servicer, companies like Navient, Nelnet, and others, takes their cut for processing your payment. These companies are making billions annually just for collecting money and managing accounts. Then there are the original lenders or the investors who bought your loan as a financial asset. Yes, your education debt has been packaged, securitized, and sold on financial markets just like mortgage-backed securities. Wall Street figured out they could bundle thousands of student loans together, slice them into tranches, and sell them to investors as guaranteed income streams. After all, these debts can't be discharged. The government backs them, and the payments are extracted through wage garnishment if necessary. It's as close to a risk-free investment as exists in modern finance. And that extraction mechanism is where this system reveals its true brutality. If you default on your student loans, and let's be clear, default isn't a choice people make lightly. It's what happens when you literally cannot afford to pay. The consequences are medieval. The government and loan servicers have powers that would make a mob enforcer jealous. They can garnish up to 15% of your wages without even going to court. They can seize your entire tax refund year after year. They can take a portion of your Social Security benefits when you're elderly and thought you'd finally escaped. There's no statute of limitations. The debt never dies. And here's something that should horrify you. There are currently hundreds of thousands of Americans over the age of 60 still making student loan payments. Thousands in their 70s, people who took out loans in the 80s or 90s, who have been paying for decades, who are now trying to survive on fixed retirement income while the government garnishes their Social Security checks. Think about that for a moment. We've created a system where someone's decision to pursue education at 20 years old is still extracting wealth from them at 70. The statistics paint a picture that should be a national scandal, but barely makes the news. Roughly 1 in 4 student loan borrowers is either in default or delinquency. Millions more are trapped in perpetual income-driven repayment plans, where their monthly payment doesn't even cover the accumulating interest, meaning their balances grow larger every single year despite making payments. The total outstanding student loan debt in America recently surpassed $1.7 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To put that in perspective, it's more than all credit card debt, more than all auto loan debt. It's second only to mortgage debt in this country. And unlike mortgages, which are tied to appreciating assets, student debt is tied to nothing except the borrower's ability to work and generate income for the rest of their lives. This is the transformation that happened while most of America wasn't paying attention. Education, once seen as a public good worth investing in, became a profit center. Students became commodities, and debt became the mechanism for extracting wealth from an entire generation on a scale that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. The mindset shift required to make this happen was profound, convincing the public that education is a private benefit rather than a public investment, that students should bear the full cost and risk, that debt is normal and acceptable, and just the price of admission to the middle class. But the revelations keep coming once you start looking. The same politicians who voted to make student debt inescapable also voted for massive corporate bailouts, for tax cuts that disproportionately benefited the wealthy, for bankruptcy protections that let companies walk away from pension obligations. The rules are different depending on who you are and how much power you have. This perpetual profit machine runs with the efficiency of any well-designed system. It converts young people's hopes and ambitions into guaranteed revenue streams for financial institutions. It operates in plain sight, defended by politicians who receive campaign donations from the very companies profiting from the arrangement. And it grinds forward relentlessly, year after year, extracting billions from borrowers who signed up believing they were investing in their future, not signing themselves into indentured servitude. If you're starting to feel like the whole thing was designed to trap you, write in the comments, the trap is real. Let me know you're seeing the full picture now, because what we need to talk about next is the human cost of all this. The numbers tell one story, but the human cost tells another. One that's far more devastating and personal. Because behind every statistic about default rates and compound interest, there's a real person whose life has been fundamentally altered by this system. The journey that was supposed to lead to prosperity and opportunity has instead become a trap that reshapes every major decision, every dream, every possibility for an entire generation. And the impact isn't just financial, it's psychological, social, relational. It touches everything. Let's talk about the life decisions that get put on hold indefinitely. Marriage rates among millennials and Gen Z are significantly lower than previous generations, and student debt is a major factor. Think about what it means to enter a relationship knowing you're bringing $50, $70, $100,000 in inescapable debt to the table. That's not just a number, it's a weight that affects whether you can afford a wedding, whether you can buy a home together, whether you can even think about having children. And speaking of children, birth rates have plummeted among educated young adults, with many citing financial instability as the primary reason for delaying or foregoing parenthood altogether. The decision to have a family, something that should be based on love and readiness, becomes an impossible calculation of whether you can afford daycare while also making student loan payments. Home ownership, the traditional cornerstone of American middle-class wealth building, has become a fantasy for millions. You can't save for a down payment when your student loan payment is the equivalent of a mortgage. Banks look at your debt-to-income ratio and decline your application. So you keep renting, building equity for someone else, watching housing prices climb further out of reach while your loan balance barely moves. But the damage goes even deeper into career choices and life purpose. Here's where the system reveals its most insidious effect. It doesn't just burden people with debt, it fundamentally distorts their entire professional trajectory. Someone who went to school to become a teacher, driven by a genuine calling to educate and inspire, looks at their loan balance and realizes they can't afford to actually teach. The salary won't cover the payments, so they pivot. They go into corporate training, or they take a soul-crushing administrative job they hate because it pays enough to keep the collectors at bay. The social worker who wanted to help vulnerable communities ends up in private practice serving wealthy clients because that's where the money is. The artist becomes a graphic designer for a corporation. The passionate environmentalist ends up working for an oil company because they need the salary. This isn't about people selling out. It's about people being forced into a mindset where financial survival trumps purpose and passion. The system takes people with vocations, with genuine callings to serve and create, and transforms them into wage workers optimizing for debt repayment. That's not personal failure, that's structural violence. And we need to talk about the mental health crisis that nobody's adequately addressing. The rates of anxiety and depression among young adults with student debt are significantly higher than their debt-free peers. And that's not correlation, it's causation. Imagine waking up every day to a balance that grows faster than you can pay it. Imagine the constant background stress of knowing that one job loss, one medical emergency, one unexpected expense could send you into default and trigger wage garnishment. Imagine being 35 years old, doing everything right, working full-time, and still living like you're broke because half your income goes to loans. That chronic financial stress literally rewires your brain, keeps your cortisol levels elevated, affects your sleep, your relationships, your physical health. People describe feeling trapped, hopeless, like they're running on a treadmill that never stops. Some use the language of servitude, of being owned, because that's genuinely what it feels like. No matter how hard you work, you can't get free. The cruel irony that sits at the heart of this entire catastrophe is that education was sold as the path to upward mobility, the great equalizer that would let anyone climb the economic ladder through hard work and merit. Study hard, go to college, get your degree, and you'll join the middle class. That was the promise repeated by every guidance counselor, every parent, every politician. But for millions, education became the mechanism of their economic descent, not ascent. The transformation from opportunity to trap happened so gradually that most people didn't see it coming. By the time they realized the promise was broken, they were already locked in, already signed on the dotted line, already committed to decades of payments. First-generation college students, the ones who were supposed to benefit most from access to higher education, often end up worse off than if they'd never gone at all. They take on massive debt for degrees from schools that don't have the prestige or connections to deliver on the promised return on investment. They graduate without the cultural capital or professional networks that wealthy students take for granted. and they end up straddling two worlds, too educated and expensive for the working-class jobs they grew up around, but without the resources or connections to break into genuinely lucrative professional fields. This is the human wreckage left behind by a system that treats education as a commodity and students as revenue sources. These aren't abstract policy failures we're discussing. They're lives derailed, potential unrealized, dreams abandoned. The person who should have been an incredible nurse is instead miserable in pharmaceutical sales. The gifted writer works in content marketing, hating every word they produce. The passionate environmentalist is writing grants for the very industries destroying the planet. And they're all trapped, all making their payments, all part of the perpetual profit machine we talked about earlier. The revelations keep unfolding the more you look. The student debt crisis isn't separate from declining birth rates, or the housing crisis, or the mental health epidemic, or political polarization. It's connected to all of it, a central thread running through the unraveling of middle-class stability in America. The promise was simple and compelling. Study and you'll succeed. Invest in yourself and it will pay dividends. Education is the ticket to a better life. The reality has been something far darker. Study and you'll be our debtor forever. Invest in yourself and we'll extract wealth from you for decades. Education is the mechanism by which we'll ensure you never achieve the security your parents had. That's not hyperbole. That's the lived experience of tens of millions of Americans right now. If you're one of them, or if you're watching someone you love struggle under this weight, drop a comment and just say, "This is my reality." Because what we're building toward now is understanding how this connects to the larger patterns of corruption and wealth extraction. What I want you to see now is how student debt isn't just an isolated problem. It's part of a much larger pattern, a playbook that Wall Street has perfected over decades. Once you understand this connection, you start seeing the same fingerprints on crisis after crisis, the same players running the same scams with slightly different window dressing. The student loan catastrophe is fundamentally using the exact same architecture as the financial crimes that nearly destroyed the global economy in 2008, and recognizing that pattern is crucial to understanding how power actually operates in modern America. Let's talk about securitization, because this is where the revelations get truly ugly. Remember how we discussed that your student loan gets packaged and sold as a financial product? Here's how that works in practice. Financial institutions take thousands of individual student loans, bundle them together into what's called student loan asset-backed securities, or SLABs. They slice these bundles into different tranches based on perceived risk, slap some ratings on them, and sell them to investors, pension funds, hedge funds, foreign governments, as stable, reliable income streams. And why are they considered stable and reliable? Because as we've established, these debts cannot be escaped. They survive bankruptcy. They can be collected through wage garnishment. They're backed by the federal government. From an investor's perspective, it's beautiful. Guaranteed returns with virtually zero risk. The same minds that brought you mortgage-backed securities simply applied the same formula to a different type of debt. Now here's where your understanding of 2008 needs to connect with what's happening right now. Before the housing crisis, Wall Street was doing the exact same thing with mortgages. They were bundling subprime loans, mortgages given to people who clearly couldn't afford them, and selling these toxic packages as AAA-rated safe investments. The rating agencies, paid by the very banks creating these products, rubber-stamped them as secure. Everyone involved knew the underlying loans were garbage, that millions of Americans were being set up to default. But nobody cared because they were making money hand over fist. When the whole house of cards collapsed, who paid the price? Not the executives who designed the scheme, not the banks that profited from it, not the rating agencies that lied about the risk. The American taxpayer bailed out the banks while millions of ordinary people lost their homes, their savings, their retirements. And not a single major Wall Street executive went to prison. The impact of that should still make your blood boil. But here's what's even more infuriating. They're doing it again with student loans, and this time the scheme is even more bulletproof. At least with mortgages, when people defaulted, the banks had to eat some losses through foreclosures that didn't cover the loan value. With student loans, there's no collateral to lose value. The debt just follows the person forever. And if they can't pay, the government steps in to cover losses through guarantees and subsidies. Wall Street has created the perfect perpetual motion machine of wealth extraction. They originate the loans, or buy them from originators. They securitize them and sell them for immediate profit. And then they continue to profit from servicing the debt for decades. Every single stage generates fees and returns, and the risk has been completely offloaded onto borrowers and taxpayers. The inner workings of this operation reveal the same revolving door we saw in 2008. Executives from Sallie Mae, Navient, and major banks cycle in and out of government positions at the Department of Education and Treasury. They write the regulations that govern their own industry. They testify before Congress as experts on education policy. They make campaign contributions to both parties, ensuring that no matter who's in power, their interests are protected. When there's talk of student debt relief or bankruptcy reform, these same players mobilize their lobbying apparatus and kill any meaningful change. The system is working exactly as designed, for them. What we're witnessing is the fundamental business model of modern American finance, and it follows the same pattern every single time. Identify an essential human need, turn it into a debt instrument, make that debt inescapable, securitize it for immediate profit, and use government power to guarantee you always get paid. They did it with housing. They're doing it with student loans. They're doing it with healthcare debt. They're even doing it with municipal water systems and infrastructure. The decision to structure the economy this way wasn't made by markets or inevitable forces. It was made by specific people with names and addresses who knew exactly what they were creating. And here's the hidden truth that connects all of this. These aren't accidents or unintended consequences. This is organized wealth extraction operating under the cover of legitimate business. When organized crime runs a protection racket, we call it extortion and send people to prison. When Wall Street does the same thing through complex financial instruments and lobbying, we call it innovation and give them bonuses. The only real difference is the level of sophistication and the willingness of government to protect one, but not the other. Student debt is a protection racket. Pay us for decades or we'll destroy your credit, garnish your wages, and make your life miserable. The housing bubble was a pump and dump scheme. Inflate values, sell at the peak, leave others holding the bag. The bailouts were money laundering. Take public funds and distribute them to private shareholders. This transformation of the American economy from productive capitalism to extractive feudalism has been deliberate and methodical. The same playbook gets used again and again because it works. Because the people running these schemes are never held accountable. Because they've captured the regulatory apparatus that's supposed to constrain them. And student debt might be their most successful execution yet, because they've managed to frame it as the borrower's personal responsibility rather than systemic predation. They've convinced millions of people that their inability to pay off loans with deliberately impossible terms is a personal moral failing rather than the predictable outcome of a rigged system. The journey from the 2008 bailouts to today's student debt crisis should have taught us something fundamental about how power operates. The rules are different depending on which side of the transaction you're on. Banks that commit fraud get bailouts. Students who can't pay impossible debts get garnishment. Executives who destroy the economy get bonuses. Borrowers who default get ruined credit and seized wages. And the mechanism that protects this arrangement is political power purchased through lobbying, campaign contributions, and the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. If you're starting to see how this pattern repeats across different crises, how the same players keep winning while everyone else keeps losing, write in the comments, same playbook, different crisis. Because understanding this pattern is the first step toward breaking free from it. Understanding this pattern is the first step toward breaking free from the mindset that keeps us trapped. Because here's what the architects of this system count on more than anything else: your ignorance, your isolation, and your resignation. They need you to believe that your struggle is personal, that you're alone in it, that nothing can be done. The moment you recognize that this is systemic, that millions are experiencing the same thing, that it was deliberately designed this way, that's when you become dangerous to their model. Knowledge isn't just power in some abstract sense. In this context, knowledge is the first and most crucial form of resistance because it breaks the psychological chains that keep people compliant even when the system is destroying them. What I want you to understand is that recognizing the machine doesn't mean you're powerless against it. In fact, it's the opposite. Once you see how it works, You can make decisions that minimize its impact on your life, and you can join with others who see it too. There are real movements happening right now, grassroots organizations of borrowers who've stopped accepting the narrative that they're personally responsible for an impossible situation. Groups like the Debt Collective are organizing strikes, advocating for blanket forgiveness and providing mutual aid to people in crisis. They're challenging the legitimacy of these debts in ways that make the system very uncomfortable. Legislative pressure is building, even if it's slow and faces massive resistance from the lobbying machine we talked about. Politicians are starting to feel the heat from constituents who are fed up, who are refusing to accept that this is just how things have to be. The journey from awareness to action doesn't require you to become a full-time activist, though if that's your calling, we need you. It starts with simply refusing to internalize the shame and failure that the system wants you to feel. When you miss a payment because you had to choose between student loans and medical care, that's not your moral failing. That's the system forcing impossible choices. When you can't save for retirement because your loan payment takes a third of your income, that's not poor financial planning. That's mathematical impossibility by design. Rejecting the psychological warfare is itself an act of resistance. Talking openly about your debt instead of hiding it in shame, sharing strategies with others, refusing to let this define your worth as a person, these aren't small things. They're how you maintain your humanity inside a dehumanizing system. On a practical level, there are ways to navigate this nightmare more intelligently once you understand how it works. Income-driven repayment plans, while imperfect and sometimes just delaying the problem, can provide breathing room. Public service loan forgiveness, despite its bureaucratic nightmares and frequent denial of legitimate applications, is still worth pursuing if you qualify. Refinancing can sometimes lower interest rates, though you need to understand what protections you're giving up. The key is making these decisions from a place of clear-eyed understanding rather than desperation. You're not trying to win a rigged game. You're trying to minimize the damage while working toward changing the rules entirely. And that's a crucial distinction because it affects how you approach every choice. You're not playing their game on their terms. You're surviving their system while building power to dismantle it. But let's zoom out, because this impact extends far beyond student loans. What we're really talking about is the corporate capture of democratic government, the transformation of public goods into profit centers, the systematic transfer of wealth from the many to the few. Student debt is one battlefield in a much larger war. Healthcare, housing, infrastructure, even water and air quality. These are all being subjected to the same logic of extraction and privatization. The same players, the same playbook, the same protection from accountability. Fighting back against student debt means joining a broader coalition of people resisting this entire model of how society should function. It means recognizing that your struggle is connected to the medical debt crisis, to wage stagnation, to the housing shortage, to climate inaction. These aren't separate issues. They're all symptoms of the same disease, which is the subordination of human needs to profit maximization. The hidden truth they really don't want you to discover is that this system only works as long as we remain atomized and defeated. Every person who understands how it functions is a crack in their armor. Every conversation where someone learns they're not alone, not crazy, not personally failing, that's a threat to the narrative they need to maintain. When people start organizing collectively, sharing resources and strategies, demanding political change, the operators behind the scenes start getting nervous because their entire model depends on your compliance, your continued payments, your acceptance that this is just how the world works. The moment critical mass shifts and people say no more, we're not paying into a fraudulent system, we're not accepting these terms, we demand the rules be changed, that's when real transformation becomes possible. This isn't naive optimism. History shows us that entrenched systems of exploitation do fall, but only when people collectively withdraw their consent and demand something different. The labor movement, the civil rights movement, every major social transformation came from people recognizing a systemic injustice and refusing to accept it anymore. We're at a similar inflection point with the entire financialized economy. The revelations are spreading faster than they can contain them. More people every day are connecting these dots, seeing the pattern, refusing the guilt trip. And yes, the forces arrayed against change are massive. Trillions of dollars, institutional power, media control, political influence. But they're not invincible. Their weakness is that their model requires our participation. We are the ones making the payments. We are the ones whose labor generates the wealth they extract. And while individual withdrawal is impossible, you can't just stop paying without devastating consequences. Collective action changes the equation entirely. What I'm asking you to do right now is simple but profound. Refuse to accept that this is inevitable or natural. Treat it as what it is, a system designed by people, maintained by political choices, and therefore changeable through different choices and sustained pressure. Educate yourself further. Connect with others fighting the same fight. Support legislative efforts for debt cancellation and bankruptcy reform. Vote for politicians who actually challenge Wall Street rather than those bankrolled by it. And most importantly, keep the conversation going, because silence is their greatest ally. If what you've heard today has shifted something in your understanding, if you're ready to stop treating this as personal failure and start recognizing it as systemic theft, drop a comment and just say, "I'm done being silent." Because what comes next depends on how many of us are willing to stand up and say enough is enough. What comes next depends on how many of us are willing to stay awake, stay informed, and refuse to go back to sleep once we've seen how the machine really operates. And look, if you made it all the way to this point in the video, that tells me something important about you. You're not looking for surface-level content or easy answers. You're here because you want to understand the deeper currents shaping our world, the systems operating behind the headlines, the truth that doesn't get packaged into convenient sound bites. That's exactly why this channel exists, and it's why I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, because we're building something here that you won't find in mainstream media, a place where we follow the money, expose the patterns, and connect dots that powerful people would prefer stay disconnected. If this conversation landed for you, if something shifted in how you see student debt or the broader financial system, drop a comment and let me know you made it to the end by writing, "Eyes wide open." I read every single comment, and honestly, seeing those messages is what keeps me digging into these topics, researching the inner workings, and bringing you content that actually matters. Your engagement isn't just a metric, it's confirmation that there's an audience for truth-telling that doesn't pull punches or pretend the system is basically fine. And do me a favor, throw a like on this video, not because I'm fishing for validation, but because it genuinely helps push this content to more people who need to see it. The algorithm doesn't care about importance or truth, it cares about engagement. Every like is a small act of resistance against a system designed to keep this kind of analysis buried while promoting content that keeps you distracted and passive. Now, this conversation doesn't end here. There's a video right here that takes what we've discussed and goes even deeper into how this pattern of financial extraction plays out across other sectors of the economy. Click on it and keep this journey going, because once you start seeing these connections, you can't unsee them, and that awareness is exactly what they're afraid of. I'll see you there.